let's hear from Mark and Chris. I think all these ideas apply whether you're senior leader in a Fortune 500 company or a shift leader at Burger King. All these ideas are applicable. And the first one is understanding that culture, whether it's company culture or team culture, is a top-down function. It can't be delegated. And I think Mark, you already kind of highlighted or started the conversation here on what you mean by that. But I'd like you to just elaborate a little bit more because this is actually one of my favorite kind of issues to bring to light is this idea that everything culture is like, oh, that's HR's job. So, it's almost like, in small companies, leaders dream of the day they can finally have an HR culture or an HR director because then they can have a great culture. Or if you're in a
Yeah.
big company, it's like, well, we have some cultural problems. Let's go to HR and they'll sprinkle some type of magic HR fairy dust, on our culture and something will happen, which I'm going to guess you guys are going to tell us not going to happen. Right.
Uh,
So can you
Not going
elaborate
to
a little bit,
happen.
please,
Yeah.
on what you mean here by how this is something that
Yeah.
just can't be delegated to an HR team. Now, before we do, I do want to point out the HR team is an absolutely essential partner in this process. So we're not digging HR here. What we're saying is it can't just be a project that's delegated to HR. Is that if I'm understanding you correctly?
Well, you're absolutely correct. And here's why. Because when people delegate, especially to HR, who are the most well-meaning people on the planet, they're like nurses in hospitals. They're the backbone of everything, right? But if they even try to dictate that culture becomes a certain way, or even better, they try to leverage the good parts that they see in the culture, but maybe others don't. That their CEO, because he's or she is not involved, still does whatever the heck he or she wants to do, and it often contradicts the culture as outlined by HR, right? So then we get into
Is
this.
that a problem?
Oh my God. It's hypocritical, right? It's
Right.
it's it's that paternal do as I say, not as I do thing. And by the way, men, and specifically old white men, are 300 times worse at this. And yes, Chris and I are old white men. We get it. But they're way worse about this than women are or people of color leaders are because people of color tend to have more empathy, more compassion. They came from a different background. They're inspired by different things than older white men who are historically and from an education point of view, from a precedent point of view, only focused on results.
Mm.
Like, I don't care what the damn culture is. If I meet my milestones this quarter, nothing else matters. And that's exactly how they act themselves. And they tolerate others acting in the same way. Right. So, no, HR doesn't stand a chance if the CEO isn't completely, fully engaged with defining and aligning and refining the culture to a specific goal. Then all we get is, you're, instead of being chief role model of that defined culture, you're chief hypocrite.
Mm. So what
Let
would
me
be your?
add to that if I can,
Yeah, absolutely,
Matt.
Chris.
One of the things that we realized early on is that senior leaders have the authority and the responsibility to make decisions, and they, of course, hold the purse strings. And that can be in a nonprofit, it can be in a for-profit, it can be a small, cool, small business on a street corner on Main Street, or it can be a multinational. We worked across all of those.
And even in
But
a
the
rock band.
and which can be harder than any company. However,
Right.
success happened in ours. But the idea that senior leaders have to be chief role models, and that's Mark's language, and it's so vitally important. We It used to be that I would collect stories because there would be stupid leadership happening, and it would be such a great example. I just couldn't pass it by. And now with the internet, we get people posting stupid leadership behaviors, 30 times a day. And it's like, oh, there's millions of stories. So I do have my favorites. But the reality is that delegating doesn't work because those leaders are still role models. And if they discount or demean or dismiss people's efforts, ideas, or accomplishments, that's going to permeate. That is the, in essence, standard of culture that the leaders are modeling, and therefore everybody aligns to that. And the problem is you can put any wonderful aspirational values on the wall of your conference rooms, but the way you behave and the decisions you make and the lousy behaviors you tolerate in your organization are going to be the primary drivers of that culture. So you can't delegate it. You've got to embrace it. And we've literally had senior leaders start with our process and come to a point where they say, and Mark, I've got to use this example from one of the organizations that you were the lead on. It's like, I don't care if these people are happy, I just want them to produce. And when we give them the chance to tell us what they'd love us to fix, all they do is complain. And it's like, that means what you're doing isn't working and it's not healthy. Is that fair, Mark?
Well, it's not only fair, but I'll give you the exact quote in that moment. I'll never forget it. He said, we asked these people what they thought about our culture. And since that moment, all they've done is bitch. Excuse me? Yeah. So
should be a sign.
This won't surprise you, Matt, and most of your listeners. But by that Friday, we had walked in and just said, we can't help you. With that approach, we can't be a part of this, and walked away from a substantial contract rather than be involved with a leader who just had no self-awareness at all.